Does your personality type change over time? As a Myers-Briggs certified practitioner, this is a question I get all the time. Does my type change? A lot of times people will come across the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator through different means. There's lots of books out there, there's free assessments online, but there's actually a legitimate official instrument that's been scientifically validated that is used to help you discover what's called your innate preferences. So when we're looking at your personality type through the lens of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, part of the overarching theory is no. Your personality type actually doesn't change over time. Now, I'm going to put a little star there, and we're going to look at some possible variations of that answer. But overall, I find that that is so true. Your type doesn't change. If we haven't met before, welcome. My name is Gary Williams, and I have the pleasure of getting to serve changemakers and gaining clarity and getting unstuck using their personality and purpose so they can go out and create a better future in our world. And today, I'm so excited to unpack this question of whether or not your core personality type changes over time. So when we're talking about the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, you're probably familiar with it. You likely know that there's 16 different personality types, and it's created or made up of 4 different pairs, preference pairs, or we call them dichotomies. So there's 4 different options in your personality type code. And so you might have a personality type like ESTJ, INFP, ISFP. There's all sorts of different options, 16 of them made up of one of 2 different options in these preference pairs. So we're looking at E versus I, extroversion versus introversion. We're looking at S versus N, sensing versus intuition. We're looking at T versus F, thinking versus feeling, and J versus P, judging versus perceiving. Now, the underarching theory behind this tool is that we all have innate preferences or inborn preferences. And this theory comes from the theory of psychological type by Carl Jung. Fundamentally, he believes that our preferences are innate. They're with us in our DNA and the way that we were born and brought into this world. And our preferences do not actually change over time. Now, to unpack this a little bit more, I want you to imagine you using your hands. You've probably seen me talking with my hands throughout today's conversation. My preference, my preferred hand is my right hand. I use it all the time. It's my dominant hand. But as you're seeing in this conversation, I'm still using my left hand. I still use it all day when I'm picking things up, moving things. But if you ask me to sign something, I'm going to be signing with my right hand. Okay? And that's the idea when we're looking at these preferences. You could still use other aspects of who you are, but at the end of the day, one of them is going to feel a little bit more comfortable. It's going to feel a little bit more natural, just like for me, my right hand does. And that's the idea behind this tool. So when we're looking at personality type, specifically using MBTI or the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, our goal is to actually identify your innate preferences. So knowing that, the simple answer is no. Your personality type, your core type, your preferences do not change over time. Then that begs the question. A lot of times people will tell me, I took it once a decade ago and I took it again now and I've got different results. I have different letters. So my personality type must have changed, right? Probably not. Your core type probably hasn't changed, but you might have grown. You might have developed. So let's dig into a couple really common instances, 3 to be specific, instances where sometimes this does happen, where people may test and retest and see different results, but usually it's not their core personality changing in terms of their preferences. So, number 1, this is the reality. It is really hard for us as human beings to see in our own minds. There's this idea of our inner versus our outer world, inside of us and outside of us. And our inner world can be really hard to discern, to be able to recognize what's happening there. Why? Because we can't really compare to other people. It's all we've ever known, and we don't know what's happening for other people. Sometimes we can see evidence of it, but that evidence is brought out into the outer world. So time and time again, I see people mistyped or see variation over time because of our inability to really know what's happening internally, because we don't really have something to root it in. We don't have the ability to compare it. And then trying to assign language to that can be really challenging. So number one, that idea of our inner worlds, seeing in our own minds, can be really challenging. And so it can sometimes appear that our personality type might change if we're recognizing different patterns, or we're seeing different things, experiencing different things, but likely your core personality type actually didn't change. The second thing that I often see is that people will sometimes take these different personality tests and assessments like the MBTI with a specific role or context in mind. A lot of workplaces will use an assessment like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And if someone is thinking about a role, such as the job that they have, or being a mother, or being a sister, or a brother, whatever, right? When you're thinking of a specific role or context, a lot of times we are thinking about how we're supposed to behave, or how we're supposed to show up as that person. But it might not actually be our preference. We might believe we're supposed to show up in that way, but it might not be to the core of who we really are. And again, it's not like we're trying to be something that we're not. It's just a lot of times when we think about roles in our lives, we get focused on the behavior instead of the core preference of what we actually desire and who we are. So one, it's hard to see in our own minds. Two, a lot of times we'll think about a specific role or context, and when our role or context changes, sometimes the way that we see ourselves might change. And when you do a self-reported assessment, okay, you might see that things are changing a little bit, again, even though your core personality type is not actually changing. The third thing, which is the instance where it might actually feel like you've changed, is as we grow older, we're constantly experimenting. And as a result of that experimentation, we're growing and developing as human beings. And that's really good. That's healthy. We want to encourage that growth and development. But again, a lot of times we're accessing parts of our identities that are harder for us to access. And it might feel like it's becoming more natural, but your core preference likely still isn't changing. A lot of times as we grow and develop, we'll start to recognize blind spots in our lives, and we'll try to become better at things, which is really good and really healthy. But again, our goal is to get back to that innate preference, that inborn identity. So sometimes going back to thinking about a younger version of ourselves can make it even easier to recognize these core preferences. Again, you can create balance just like using both of your hands. You don't have to only use one of them. Okay, we encourage you to use both hands. And the same thing is true with these preferences in your personality type. But to actually dig in and see what those innate preferences are is so powerful. So in this video, we explored the concept of whether or not your personality type changed. There's two things I'd love for you to do. One, if you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to invite you back so you can be engaged in future conversations around topics and personality and purpose and creating a better future for our world. The second thing is I'm curious if you could comment below, have you ever taken an assessment such as the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator more than once, and did you see some of the results shift or change? And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about why that might be. Even if you don't, drop what it was the first time you took it, the second time you took it. I'm curious to see how things might be shifting for you. So drop that as a comment below. Again, thanks so much for joining us today. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Take care.